Welcome to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show with former NFL QB Matt Sims, Irish Breakdown Recruiting Analyst Ryan Roberts, and former college long snapper Joe DeLeone.
Welcome back to another episode of the First Team College Football Recruiting Show. I'm Joe DeLeone, joined by former NFL quarterback Matt Sims, also the founder of Sims Complete QB, joining us as well. Irish Breakdown recruiting analyst Ryan Roberts. And today we're moving on to the defensive side of the ball. We've already talked about a ton of fantastic offensive recruits. Now we're moving on to defense, and we're starting things off with edge, which has one extremely supremely talented player at the top, and then a bunch of really fun names that we are going to discuss throughout. So guys, I want to open this discussion with first, before we get to those four players that we're discussing on today's show, it's a little bit difficult, I think, for non-football fans or people that aren't super connected with the game and have insight on the intricacies of placing guys at specific positions. A lot of times we do tend to see these edge rushers being the best athlete on the field, the biggest guy that's plopped on the line of scrimmage and asked to rush off the edge. But I want to take a step further than that. Ryan, for you first, what are usually the reasons why certain guys are placed at edge, maybe aside from defensive tackle or maybe playing linebacker? What makes these edge rushers stand out, and what are the things that we're usually looking for these recruits?
I mean, the first thing that pops off is length, right? Like, you want a guy that has length coming off the edge, and you want twitch. Like, you want explosiveness off the snap. You want length. Those are kind of the two biggest things, Joe. And then, I mean, of course, you always want a guy that has some flexibility in his lower half, right? A guy that can kind of bend that corner and turn that table. Because for me, there's different types of defensive ends. There's power-based ends that kind of just work as speed-to-power converters and want to go right through your chest or inside counter. But if a guy has the ability to win outside track and then add on the inside counters and the power profile and all that stuff, the more you can do, the more valuable you are. But, I mean, the over-encompassing macro view of what you're asking is you want length, you want explosiveness, and you want bend in the lower half. Those are the things that really pop on film.
Matt, are those a lot of the same things that you notice that you look for with the top-rated edge recruits?
Yeah, I think it's something that's, Ryan is hitting all the right points. It's all those things are true. And, at the end of the day, that is a position, too, that just beauty is in the eye of the beholder in a lot of ways. There's going to be certain teams that look for more of those power, stronger guys. Other teams that enjoy having the smaller edge rushers that can bend and rush with speed and then have power and explosion to their game too. So, it's just one of those things where it just depends on who you're talking to. The Belichickian defenses of the world, they want those really big, strong, long-armed, heavy defensive ends because they want to make sure that they can control the line of scrimmage and make sure no one runs outside of them. Then you flip it and you have other teams in the NFL where they got guys that maybe are a little bit undersized, but they're all about just speed and getting after the quarterback. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter as long as you're getting guys that affect the pocket and disrupt the pocket and hit the quarterback.
I think one of the funniest things for edge recruits out of any other defensive position, when you see that they're also playing tight end or receiver, like it's very unique in that sense. And I just talked about it a second ago, how it's the best athlete oftentimes on the field. The biggest guy, the most explosive kid is placed at defensive end or as a stand-up rusher. And these guys are also scoring touchdowns on the other end because they're springy, they're long, they're athletic. And it's funny. You're watching these defensive end highlights and then you're like, wait, this guy's running a fade? This guy's catching a screen right now. It's very unique that these edge guys are placed in those situations.
Well, it's cool too because in a sense, with a lot of these schools and listen, the scouting shows and all that, you have to place these guys somewhere to properly rank them in comparison to other players across the country, right? Because there's just so many football players out there. But at the end of the day, all of these schools, really what they're just trying to do, they're just trying to accumulate as many good football players as possible. And these four guys are really good football players. Where they end up being may not even be anywhere near what they're projected at on these websites. We discuss all the time before the show before the show of just how many of these guys, hey, he might play here, he could play here, he could do this. And, that's what's interesting. And I think there's cases here at this board today that we have where there could be some places where they find their homes elsewhere outside of the edge position.
Yeah, and Joe, I think even when you look at kind of how the NFL has turned, right? Like quarterback is always the number one, right? Like those are the money getters in the NFL because it's the most important position in all of sports. But then after that, it becomes a great conversation of offensive tackle, pass rushers, defensive ends. Like those are the paramount positions, right? And I would argue that when you look at the pass rushers in the NFL, whether you're talking about the smaller guys like the Von Millers of the world, or you're talking about the freak shows of Myles Garrett, those guys are just made on a different planet, man, like athletically. Those dudes are long, explosive, pound for pound, probably the best athletes on the field. And I think that's why, to your point, that's why on the high school level, they're asked to do so much, right? Like, why wouldn't you put that kid at tight end? I mean, he's 6'5", right, with long arms, athleticism. Like, they're the best athletes on the field in a lot of cases, right? So I think that's why you see the versatility on a lot of these guys, because the coaches aren't dumb. They know that 6'5", 250 at the high school level with speed wins. And that's kind of what we're seeing on the high school level right now.
There's no roughing the passer in the high school level like there is in the NFL. So, and there was multiple times throughout these highlights where you're just like, oh, that is totally a penalty. This kid just got annihilated. But hey, it's on the huddle tape, so they like it enough to show it out there. Yeah.
Right. It's almost as if the refs don't know to call it because it's so rare when you see these big springy kids just throwing a kid who's actually 160 pounds. I'm going to share this clip on Twitter, but I also think back to how Jadeveon Clowney was a running back in high school, and there's just all these amazing athletes playing these different positions. But the four guys that we're talking about today is Keon Keeley, Matayo Uiagalelei, Jayden Wayne, and Chandavian Bradley. And I want to start things off with the number one rated edge recruit per 247 Sports right now, that being Keon Keeley. Now, at one point, he was a four-star recruit. He was in the middle of the pack, and he moved his way up to this number one spot. At the time, he was committed to the University of Notre Dame. And I've had the opportunity to talk to Keon, and he was very locked in to go and play for the Fighting Irish. Now his commitment is open. He is projected currently to play at Alabama. There's still a chance he plays at Notre Dame, a possibility, Ryan, as you mentioned in our pre-show, that he might even go to Ohio State. So he is one of those guys that is open for business. Whoever can get him and convince him to come play, Keon is on the board. He's 6'6", 242 pounds. And we talked about that length. We talked about that flexibility. Keon's got length for days. Like, this is a really long, well put together athlete. He is a perfect example of athleticism that is brought up with strong technique for a young man. And I think that he has all the talent in the world, the motor, everything you're looking for in an edge recruit. And it's pretty clear here why he's the number one rated edge recruit. There is a pretty vast difference, I think, in some of these other guys because he is putting all of it together. Ryan, I want to go to you first because you've covered his recruitment as a Notre Dame recruiting analyst.
Yep. Yeah, look, man, I mean, first and foremost, I would argue that Keon Keeley is the best prospect in the 2023 class in general, best recruit. Like, he's that special. I mean, I just talked about what I look for in edges, Joe, and I listed about, 4 or 5 different things that can make an edge kind of successful, whether you're a power-based end, whether you are an undersized edge rusher, whether you are the freak shows of the Myles Garretts of the world. And what makes Keon Keeley so special to me is that he has everything. He has every tool in his toolbox. He's 6'6" with vines for arms. He's 242 pounds right now, and you can see that steadily he's going to be 265 pounds kind of before you even blink your eye, right? He has the flexibility. He's got the explosiveness. He's got the length. He's got the power profile that's still developing. And like you said, he was a kid that off of his sophomore film was very good, and people saw it. That's why he was a 4-star. He's a top 150 kid, top 100 borderline kid, because everyone's like, yep, that guy's probably going to be a guy. And then you turn on his junior tape and you're like, oh, he has arrived. That's the player that we thought he could be, whether that's playing against Isidore Newman and the Arch Manning. I know you posted the clip on Twitter yesterday with that crazy interception he had during that game. I mean, quite frankly, man, the kid put it all together as a junior. He's only getting better. He's not nearly as good as he's going to be, which is pretty dang scary. He's a special player with every trait that you want at defensive end. So, and whether he ends up with Alabama or Ohio State or the University of Florida, which is another team that's kind of been thrown out there, whoever's getting him is going to get a special football player. This kid has every tool that you would want in the toolbox.
Yeah, and I think really the cool thing about him too, when you do the research about him, is that he's a three-sport athlete. He's football, he's basketball, and he's volleyball. Second time,
Volleyball.
with our show that we've seen that he does volleyball. Now, listen, I didn't go that deep into the rabbit hole to find out how many spikes he has per win and all that stuff. But to what you said, Ryan, too, the 7-foot wingspan, is something that he constantly mentions about himself too. But, I want to say that for a guy that has all those natural attributes, right? All the stuff that you just, the creative player in Madden back in the day where everything's 99, right? He's got all of that. I think the most exciting thing about him for me when I watch this film is that he hustles. Like, he actually plays relentless football. He has that hard hat type of bring your lunch pail to work type of attitude on the football field. The other aspect that I really got excited about when I watched this film was that he collapses the pocket a lot. And he might not always get the sack or get that extra play or whatever, or that hit on the quarterback, but a lot of the times he is forcing the quarterback to move off of his spot and he's collapsing the pocket. And, we hear it all the time. That's almost the most important thing when you're rushing the passer, is just collapsing the pocket. Not necessarily getting the sack, but when you collapse the pocket, you're usually getting a sack for your other teammates, right? So that was another thing too, the hustle and the collapsing of the pocket. And then the other advantage, I think, for him going forward is his ability to time and batting the footballs down at the line of scrimmage, which I think is like a huge and very underrated asset to a lot of football players who either do it like really well or they don't do it all. And that is something that I noticed too about him, where it's like, if you go and watch his film, it's like maybe like once or twice a game, every time he's batting a football down at the line of scrimmage. And that's a certain skill set in itself too.
Now, I want to bring up one point that you had, Matt, about his motor. And there's a guy that we've talked about, Ryan and I, on the draft show, Will Anderson, for how dominant and how fantastic his motor is. It's at a completely different level. A lot of times when you have these really athletic kids playing defensive end or stand-up outside linebacker, they might take a playoff or two. They might win the rep and slow down a little bit because they can just rely on their athleticism to make a play. But Keon has a little bit of that Will Anderson motor in him, where he goes 100 miles an hour every single play. Like, I don't see a guy who's taking a snap off. I don't see a guy who is hesitating or slowing down at any point throughout the rep. If anything, he might even speed up. That, to me, is what differentiates a really talented edge rusher and a dominant one and an elite one, is the guys that can bring the tenacity along with the talent. And I think Keon Keeley perfectly has all of that wrapped up into one player.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, we discuss guys like Von Miller and J.J. Watt. It's because they have the natural God-given ability, the work ethic, and also, too, just the relentless pursuit of playing football, and that's something that just, again, like, it's not coachable. That's a conscious decision that he's making to just give it all that he has in every football play. And the exciting thing, I think, for him, too, is that he fits well, too, like, going forward as a normal 4-3 scheme. And you see it a lot of times, too, that in his highlights that he has this stand-up stance that he likes to rush from, which I think he's actually at the moment better from. Yeah. But I see him as being a great outside linebacker DN in a 3-4 scheme as well, whether it's to the strong side or to the weak side. And for him, I think just he's going to continue to improve. He's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. And I think really, at the end of the day, what's going to be exciting for him in his development is that he is going to be a pain in the A in the run game, whether it's away or to him in the future, because he does have that strength and that size and that length, but he also has the speed to chase down things that are running in the opposite direction away from him.
Yeah. Now, Matt, it's a great note, because I think that diversity is what really sets him apart, right? Like, that's the biggest thing, is that no matter what defense you run, Keon Keeley will fit. Like, you don't even have to make it fit him. Like, he'll make it fit himself, right? Like, that's the biggest thing. And Joe, I think to your point about the motor, I mean, like I mentioned kind of in a little bit of the backgrounds, Keon has always been considered a pretty good recruit, but he has kind of been a later bloomer compared to some players. Like, there's some kids that you see him as sophomores and you're like, yep, that's a guy. That's a 5-star.
Like the next guy we're going to talk about.
Exactly. Like, those are the type of guys that are like they're physically developed a lot more than some guys are. Keon wasn't that, man. Even as a junior, Keon was only playing about 225 pounds comparative to 240 something that he is now, right? That's why you have seen that maturation over the last couple of years. I think that's why he plays so hard, because he hasn't been this 5-star since the day he set foot on a high school football field. Like he's earned what he's gotten to this point, which I think is a testament to just how special not only his talent is, but also what his work ethic is as well.
Now, one last thing I want to hit on with him before we move on to Matayo Uiagalelei. Ryan, if you could maybe just provide, where do you think he ends up? Because I know that you've tracked him and as a former Notre Dame commit, and heck, I interviewed him right after he committed. I thought he was going to stay locked in. The way that he was talking about how he wanted to build something special for the Fighting Irish, I thought that was where he was going to stay. But he ends up going and opening up his recruitment. Now Alabama seems to be the likely outcome. Do you think he ends up at Alabama? Is that the likely outcome here?
I mean, if you ask me to make a prediction today, that's probably what it would be at, Joe. But again, Ohio State's making a big push right now. I'm not going to count any team out of this one because I think Keon is legitimately giving everyone a chance that's on the table for him right now. But if you ask me where I think it would make the most sense, because I think that the reason that he left the Notre Dame class outside of some outside factors around him that we're not going to get into today is that he does want kind of that trajectory towards being a potential first-round pick down the line. And he wants to play in an organization a team in Alabama that has done that. Like you're seeing that right now with what they've done with Will Anderson over the last couple of years, right? So that projection and that trajectory is what he's really looking for. So I think if Notre Dame wasn't the best fit for him from a full scope, in his opinion, I think what he's looking for is that trajectory. So whether it's in Alabama or Ohio State's, I think that both those teams have shown that they are very capable of producing high caliber pass rushers at the next level. So I think it's Alabama, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't be shocked if it's Ohio State at the end.
And I guess just to add to that a little bit really quickly is maybe the aspect too of just maybe Notre Dame not performing as well as they've had in the past with that unproven track record of his position and its dominance in the past, whereas like Ohio State, you see, they had Chase Young, and he probably looks at that and he thinks, all right, I could be that next player for them. So I think that plays a factor into young football players as they're making these tough decisions.
It does, Matt, because I'll say this, Notre Dame has produced some, a lot of mid-round defensive ends, defensive linemen over the last few years, but they've only had the last defensive end to get drafted in the first round was Ronaldo Wynn that used to play, kind of more in the heyday era. Yeah, he's a great football player. Jerry Tiller went in the first round playing defensive tackle. But to your point, Notre Dame hasn't had a ton of first-round picks on the defensive line recently. So I think with that track record, I think that's really one of the big things that Keon's looking for in his recruitment.
I vaguely remember, I believe it was the interview I did with Keon, that he was a lot of times when you talk to these kids, and you definitely know Ryan, they'll reference guys at the program that played at the specific program at their position. I remember the closest name that he could pull was Justin Tuck. So like that shows how long it's been since they've had a high caliber, highly drafted defensive line recruit. So whichever team ends up getting him, good luck to that program, and especially good luck to whoever has to face off against him each and every week, because Keon is really going to be special. Now, we've already got glimpses, and we've already gotten to see this next guy's brother a ton. Might actually get benched. Let's see if that actually happens or not. But Matayo Uiagalelei, the brother of DJ
easy, bro.
Uiagalelei. Well, I'm keeping it relevant.
I know that's not what our show's about. All right,
you're right.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. But Matayo Uiagalelei is a very large athlete, just like DJ was, coming out of St. John Bosco in Bellflower, California. Currently listed at 6'5", 265. Now he was one of those players currently listed as the number 6 edge recruit that I was talking about, how it's really funny watching them play tight end against these smaller kids. And it's just crazy to know that this guy is going to be playing somewhere with his hand in the dirt along a defensive line. But at the same time, he was out there catching touchdowns and he was out there making plays. The unique thing about Matayo that was really fun is that the original link I sent to you guys for highlights was mostly tight end plays. There were not a lot of defensive end plays. And as I started to do more and more digging, all I was really finding was mostly these tight end plays that he was lining up outside and getting these one-on-one reps. He's a really nice tight end prospect, but he's likely going to make his money playing on the defensive side of the ball. So, Matt, I want to go to you first. You actually have a really interesting perspective on him, on where you think he's going to end up, where he's going to be playing on defense.
Well, first of all, I thought that you were crazy and like totally messed up like the highlights and all that you sent me. Because
Same.
when I looked at it, I was just like, what are we? I thought we were talking about edge rushers here, and he's showing me a tight end. So then, but as you do digging, you look into his huddle and all those other things that are out there. With his clips. Yeah, primarily all I see is reps at the tight end position. And I said to you guys too that I didn't see a lot of plays from that defensive end position where I see him in that role at the next level, because it's not like it's going to get easier, rushing, the passer or playing the run at the next level. It's going to get more difficult. So as I kind of watched him, in his body, his athleticism, clearly he can run, change direction, catches the ball extremely well, all that stuff at the tight end position. I do think that he could potentially play tight end at that next level, but he would be a different tight end than like a Travis Kelce and what we see in this modern era, right? He would be a little bit more of an old school guy, a little bit more physical, run blocker, all that kind of stuff, running over people, catching the ball in the flat, transitioning, that kind of a thing. If he stays on the defensive side of the football, I see him more as like a potential 3 technique. I really do, as an interior defensive lineman. Like you said, he's 6'5", 265 pounds. He's not going to get lighter. He's not going to get skinnier these next few years, of his development at that next level when he gets into that Power 5 program, weightlifting, and the food regimen that they have for those guys. So that's where, like, I see, like, add another 15 to 20 pounds to this kid as a young freshman or a sophomore going forward. And I feel like he's just going to get moved into the interior part of that defensive line, as a 3 technique or maybe even a nose guard, depending on his power and strength and all that kind of stuff going forward.
And Joe, I think that's the biggest selling point to him, in my opinion, too, Matt, which is a great no, right? It's like, if this kid catches on with a program that is a defensive system that works between 3 and 4 man fronts, I think that he would be a perfect fit. Because I mean, I could project him, working in some 5, some 4-eye, 3 tech. Like, he can move all over the place a little bit. I think the main point, and the point that I 100% agree with you on, is that he's not a wide alignment rusher, right? Like, he's not a super twitchy, bendy guy. He's powerful though, and he's got a
he's not frame. Like line up in the 9 technique and just rush the passer on 3rd and long. I don't see that, like you said, at the twitchiness. And that's where, again, his versatility, like you said, is going to be big for him.
Yeah, and I think that with you get this kid up to 285, 290 when all is said and done, and he's 6'5" with the length that he has, he could be a weapon, kind of being moved up and down the line of scrimmage. But this isn't a great comparison when we're going from Keon Keeley to Matayo Uiagalelei. They're very different football players. They're going to win in very, very different ways. And it's a projection for Matayo right now because you haven't seen it a ton. But I think why people are so high on him and why people are excited about the progress he could make is that body type that we talked about, right? The power profile he has. He's body beautiful. And as he continues to add weight, there's a lot of good things that he can give you from a versatility and alignment perspective.
Body beautiful. Look at that. That was like a commercial.
Scouting turn, buddy. Yeah. Scouting turn.
I was not prepared for that reference. I haven't heard that term.
Both me and Joe were like, whoa, okay. Yeah.
Joe, I didn't call him handsome. I just said he's got a good frame.
My high school, one of my high school gym teachers used to would make us do like an ab routine during like lifting and stuff like that. And that was what he called it. No, but I'm just saying that like that was like in like the 80s or 90s or something like that. It used to be like, I don't know, it was some like a fitness term or something like that. So
this guy doesn't have a job anymore. Not in 2022, man. Yeah. No, okay.
Right. But nonetheless, Matayo, I totally agree on him moving inside. Like, he's really built like he's going to be playing on a 5 tech or in. I don't see him coming off the edge. He's just not built for it. And I don't think it's surprising that his highlights don't really show a ton of that. Now, right now, he's actually the first recruit that we've talked about on the show entirely that doesn't at least have like a projection. His recruitment is like super wide open right now. The one that I keep seeing is there's like a lot of USC references, but honestly, Ryan, I want your thoughts on this because we've done a lot of scouting on these Clemson defensive linemen for this year's class. I think that he might actually fit really well playing for the program that his brother is currently at. Now, maybe if DJ leaves, that relationship with Dabo is a little different. Nonetheless, the defensive linemen that we see at Clemson, very similar in their usage. Power profile, big explosive guys, like a guy like Brian Brzee, who has made himself a home in the interior on Clemson's defensive line. And Miles Murphy, similar type of usage that maybe Matayo could be used. So Ryan, do you kind of agree that maybe a Clemson would make sense the way that they deploy their defensive linemen?
Stylistically, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the name that popped to my head, and I'm glad you mentioned it, was Brian Bresee, right? Like Brian Bresee is 6'5", 300 pounds, had played a lot of edge in high school, and obviously he's continued to grow into the 3-tech, 4-4-eye type that we see now. I mean, he does a little bit of everything for Clemson. They still line him up on the edge at times, but I mean, even in obvious pass situations, they'll move him all the way down to a 1-tech to be that type of interior rusher. So, I mean, he can fit, Joe. I think that I think what I need, though, for whatever team ultimately ends up with Matayo is I need a defensive coordinator that has a plan for him, right? Like they need a understanding of where he's going to fit long-term. And I think that the best defensive structures in college football right now will all be able to do that, right? Like you mentioned Clemson. I can see him in Georgia that still runs a lot of 3-4 stuff. I can see him in Alabama that goes between a lot of 3-man and 4-man. Even USC, although they are still developing on the defensive side of the football, I mean, Alex Grinch is going to work between 3- and 4-man fronts a ton as well. I mean, that's kind of where we are with the modernization of the college football game against the passing attack so much, is that there's a lot more 3 down than there was probably 10, 15 years ago at this point. So you're seeing a lot more diversity up front, which I think will go into Matayo Uiagalelei's favor at the next level.
I am willing to bet a dime that he does not go to Clemson. And I just because of the situation, like you mentioned, like it's a lot, and I mean, what do you think that family's talking about every weekend? So I don't know. It would just be a muddy water type of situation, for Matayo. I feel like to walk into that, knowing the history that his brother has there in that same situation.
Now, Matt, I totally agree with you based on looking at this on the outside that it might not make a whole lot of sense for him to end up at Clemson. I think in a vacuum, schematically, perfect one-to-one fit the way that they do deploy and use their defensive linemen. But the one really weird thing about this, as much as you would think the Uiagalelei family would maybe be upset with Dabo and the way that things are going down, and if he does get replaced, there's still like this unrelenting commitment and respect for DJ that Dabo keeps turning to him after having a bad game. He just compared him to Steph Curry. So like, I almost wonder if DJ finishes the year and maybe he enters the NFL draft on good terms, he could end up at Clemson, but it's a really odd situation that it's hard to really figure out. And I do agree that it might impact that decision, and he might want to stay closer to home, which is why that USC possibility keeps being brought up with a guy like Matayo.
Yeah, I think the USC thing would be really interesting, especially too with just the fact that the new regime there, trying to get, as we've mentioned multiple times in the show, just a lot of really good football players in the door. It doesn't really necessarily matter if they have perfect, concrete homes as far as recruiting goes. For him, I think it would be a really cool situation for him to go to USC and to be in a situation where they can utilize his skill sets as an interior rusher, as a exterior person that is good against the run in certain situations, against certain matchups or teams. And then even just like a guy too, where like you see his athleticism, he could be one of those guys that in like short yardage, he is always in on the goal line, or certain situations for gadget plays and things like that, where, they throw him the ball, or he's, the extra eligible tackle and plays on the backside where it's like sprint right and throw it back left to him, so that's where for him, like, he is the epitome of just getting a good football player, a well-rounded football player. The biggest question mark is just going to be for his coaching staff to find out exactly where his home is to make the most out of his play.
Joe, I have a story for you. Story time?
Okay.
Story time. Let's hear it.
Once upon a time, the USC program had this 6'5", 270-pound freshman defensive end that played a lot on the outside and then worked his way inside. Eventually grew into a 6'5", 305-pound defensive tackle that was drafted in the first round. His name was Leonard Williams.
Oh.
There's your comp, buddy. There it is.
I think it's a great comparison.
How dare you make comps, Ryan? I don't accept it. All right, but it was a good one.
Ryan's the best in the business. Why he's allowed to determine if our comps are bad or not. But no, I like the Leonard Williams comp. I think very similar builds makes a lot of sense. Now let's get on to this next guy, guys, who is currently rated as the number 7 edge per 247 Sports. That being Jayden Wayne. from IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, 6'5", 245, currently committed to Miami. I know, shocking, a kid from Florida is committed to Miami. They're supposedly back. But I got to talk about here, and this is another player who was getting some offensive reps, was a monster on screens, which is so fun to see a guy who's going to be playing defensive end at the next level, having this that we can pull from when he's maybe a first-round pick in a couple of years, saying like, hey, who wants to see Jayden Wayne take a screen to the house or pick up a 20-yard gain? Right. I bet you didn't know he was doing that. But Wayne, as an edge rusher, I think one thing that stood out the most to me, very downhill rusher, but you were talking about this with Keon, Matt, how he has a really good understanding of how to collapse the pocket. He's got really good awareness. I just think he was always tracking the ball so well. Sometimes guys will win these reps in these one-on-one situations, and then they'll just be lost. They don't know where the football is. But I thought that Wayne did a really fantastic job of just always finding the football, getting his nose dirty, and making those plays.
Was that a cue to me or to Ryan? Okay, no, I'm kidding. So, I think really for Wayne, I think there's one big aspect to just like his career right now. He's a guy that's from Tacoma, Washington, and he's playing high school football for his last year at IMG in Florida. So I think for that, mentally and psychologically, like I think is a really big jump, and also like a cue to me to maybe why, his junior film may have been a little bit more impressive than what we've seen from his senior film so far. But he's strong. He has good hands. I would say that he's really, really raw at the position, though, at the level that he's playing at now in Florida. Because in Florida, there are just some of those right and left tackles that are just big dudes, that are those 280, 300-pound right tackle, left tackles that you just don't see at every high school level. So I think that has been a little bit of an adjustment for him to make as many plays as he's accustomed to. But I think he has a lot of upside to him. He definitely has the speed. He has the strong hands. He has the quick twitch. Now it's about just piecing all those things together. The one difference I would say between him and Keon is that for Jayden, I just want to see a little bit more just of that relentlessness, that hustle and grittiness to playing the defensive end position, and just reminding the guy that you're going against every play, that I'm there, I'm making plays, I'm making an impact at the line of scrimmage. Again, all these things that he can learn with just better understanding of, the position that he's going to at the next level.
Yeah, and it's a great note, Matt, because, he really was a man amongst boys his junior season out of the state of Washington, right? Like, those guys just couldn't handle him. It's been a little bit different of a story this year, but I think from the talent level perspective, 6'5", 245 plus pounds, has the length, he's explosive, he's powerful. Like, he's going to be a really good speed to power guy, I think, down the line, which I think you already see glimpses of it right now. So, Miami has had a lot of success with those types of guys, even recently with like a Gregory Rousseau, who's kind of that same way, like he had good linear explosiveness, but he was a speed to power guy and he had crazy length. So I think that when you're looking at Jayden Wayne, it's a really nice fit at the University of Miami, spending his senior year, obviously, in Bradenton, Florida at IMG Academy. I think he's a really talented player who hasn't put it together yet necessarily, but we shouldn't expect that all the time from a high school senior anyway, right? So he's a bowl of clay, I would call what he is right now. And what I think Jayden Wayne could be long-term, I think could be an exceptional football player. He's just barely tapping the surface of how good he can be right now.
Yeah, totally agree. I think he's one of those players where 2 or 3 years from now, we're like, where is Jayden? And then all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, there he is. He's back. Like, he's actually figured out how to play the position and what exactly his role or his skill set is, to take advantage of that. Because that's really the one difference between, I shouldn't say the one difference, but the difference between him and like Keon, right? It's just, Keon, I think, understands like what his good qualities are and how to manipulate them against the competition he's going against right now. Whereas I think Jayden, it's like you can almost see like halfway through the rep, he's like, all right, let me try this move, instead of it just naturally happening, for him. And I think that jump in skill set from Washington to Florida, is just a lot, especially, you saw in like the September months of the season, with the games where it just like didn't quite see that natural athleticism that you saw just like firing off the line of scrimmage in Washington. These last few games, a little bit more of what we expect to see from him going forward.
Yeah, and I think overall the edge position, and we discussed this a little bit at the beginning, how it's one of the positions on the defensive side where it's going to be a lot of the most raw athletes, a lot of the guys that maybe are just being dropped there and told to go have fun, be an athlete, go chase after the quarterback, and we'll figure out the technique part a little bit later on. These guys almost don't even get their full development until they're a junior or sometimes even a senior in college. I think Wayne fits that. But our next guy, Chandavian Bradley, also fits that description of somebody who is very, very raw, but has a ton of talent. He's currently listed as the number 9 edge rusher per 247 Sports from Platte County, Missouri, Platte County High School. 6'4.5", 220 pounds is his size. Currently committed to Tennessee, which is Matt's former program. But the one thing, guys, he might be on the lighter side. He might only be 220 pounds. He certainly looks like it on film. The guy has some crazy speed, some deep threat wide receiver type speed that he's able to chase down players, get after the football. I think out of any of these guys, it shouldn't be a hot take that he's the fastest amongst the group. But Ryan, we've done this on the NFL Draft Show before. You've done a really good job of projecting some athletic traits for these players. How fast linearly would you say that Bradley might be if we had to guess a 40 time right now?
I mean, I don't have any verified times in front of me, but I'd say he's probably a 4.5 something type of athlete, right? Like he can go, man. I mean, Joe, this is my type too, right? We've done the show so long now that this is the outside track guy that I always fall for. I mean, he is a guy that is going to pin his ears back, win up the outside track, up the arc, and be able to bend with good flexion in his lower half and be able to run. And that's something that he does incredibly well. And Tennessee, Matt, currently has a couple really talented defensive ends. Not only him, Caleb Herring is also another one that is committed to the 2023 class as well. But I would argue that maybe outside of Keon Keeley, that Chandavian Bradley might have the highest upside of any defensive end that I've seen in 2023, man. Like just some silly traits. I mean, you even mentioned it, Joe. Also a really good basketball player, like a good enough basketball player where he could play a high-level basketball on the Division I level. So this kid's upside is just tremendous, a flat-out incredible, just incredible mix of speed, athleticism, length. He has it all from an athleticism profile.
Yeah, he was really fun to watch. He was a great film watch. And these are all his claims, so I'm not saying that I'm a predictor of times and all that, but yeah, 40-inch vert, 4.4, 840, according to him. Maybe it's a 4.5. Doesn't matter. You're flying, right? Especially at his size. The impressive thing, too, that I mentioned to you before the show, right? The show before the show, again, is the 57-second 400 meter. I mean, that is rolling. Like, that is an impressive number right there. And to go along with, too, like you said, the playing basketball. What? Playing basketball. So just a natural athlete. One of the coolest things that I saw about him too was the quick twitch, but the ability to change direction, right? To put his foot in the ground and to go in an opposite direction, to me was super impressive. Multi-directional speed is something that, I don't think people look at enough. And when you see it at that defensive end position, especially there was 2 or 3 plays where he's making plays at the goal line, the line of scrimmage, where you see him just striking across the blocker's face so quickly that he's in the backfield before the quarterback's even handed the football off to the running back. And those are just traits and things in explosion at the line of scrimmage that you just don't see a lot. You see it, but when you see it to that degree, it's super special. And to think where he can be once he just gets a little bit more weight in his legs, and can add that power aspect to it, that's where you're like, man, this dude can be really, really scary. And the same thing for Keon. He could be one of those guys, you can line him up in that obvious passing situation as the Y9 and just be like, listen, the tackle isn't going to get out there fast enough to protect this quarterback because he's just going to run around you. Has the flexibility to bend if he does, like you mentioned, Ryan. And then the other aspect too is he could be a really good outside linebacker in a 3-4 situation where occasionally in zone blitzes, he is dropping into space with his length and athleticism and getting interceptions and batting footballs and just playing, big in zone space. So that's where I think the upside, for Bradley is just tremendous and is really exciting. And, Tennessee, I don't know what they're doing, but man, they evaluate talent extremely well because every Tennessee player that we've mentioned in the show so far, I feel like has been really, really good. And I'm not saying that because I went to Tennessee. All right. So don't give me that crap. Okay. All right. I don't want to hear that. All right. But man, whatever they're doing, it's working because they're finding some ballers out there.
Yeah, I totally agree on him maybe playing a little bit of outside linebacker. I think he fits that physical profile well to play that position. Just last thought on Bradley. He's only 220, so he's not as fully developed when it comes to his strength and the power that he's going to have. But heck, he's somebody you should be worried about if he gets up to 240, 250, maybe even bigger than that. He's going to have some really nice power to go along with this speed, and it's just something to monitor. If he gets up to that weight, he's going to be a really, really potentially unstoppable force for that Volunteers defense. So keep an eye out for that. Guys, that's a great note to wrap us up on. Folks, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're tuning in. And also go back and check out either the individual breakdowns that are posted on the YouTube channel or the full-length episodes. You can follow us at Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft, and at Sims Complete QB. We'll be back with more, and we're going to be doing defensive tackles on our next episode.